Tonight we're reading Toyland from the Nutcracker is by E.T.A. Hoffman, illustrated by Carter Goodrich. I'm certain, children, that you wouldn't have hesitated for a moment to go with the Nutcracker, who'd proven to be such a good fellow. Marie was all the more inclined to follow him because she knew he was filled with gratitude for all her help, so she said, "Of course I'll go with you, dear Mr. Drosselmeyer, but not very far and not for too long. I need to get some rest." "Then we'll take the shortest route," replied the Nutcracker, "though it's probably the most difficult." He led Marie to the big old wardrobe. She was surprised to see that it was wide open, with her father's traveling coat hanging right in front. The Nutcracker took hold of the hem and climbed up along the edge of the fox trim until he arrived at a big tassel fastened at the shoulder of the coat. He gave the tassel a tug, and a pretty little cedar ladder came down from one of the sleeves. "Now, Mrs. Stolbum, if you would be so kind as to step up the ladder," said the Nutcracker, and so she did, as soon as she'd gotten as far up as the neck of the coat. However, a dazzling light poured over her, and she found herself in a sweet smelling meadow which glittering like millions of beautiful gems. "This is Candy Meadow," the Nutcracker explained. "Come, let's go through the gate here." Marie looked up and saw a lovely gate a few steps away. It seemed at first to be made of white, brown, and raisin colored marble, but as she drew closer, she realized it was made of baked sugar almonds and raisins. The Nutcracker called it Almond Raisin Gate and pointed out a walkway running along the top of it where six monkeys in little red suits played trumpets and French horns. The, the road they were on was made of pieces of multicolored hard candies. Of every flavor, it led to a forest that was fragrant with the scent of oranges. Beautiful ribbons hung from the trees, and every branch was heavy with gold and silver fruits. A gentle breeze stirred the forest, so the glittering tinsel ribbons rustled like beautiful music as light danced off the fruits of the swaying branches. "How very charming," said Marie. "Entrance, dear Mrs. Stolbum," said the Nutcracker. "This is Christmas wood." "Oh," said Marie, "if only I could stay here a little while. It's so lovely." The Nutcracker clapped his hands, and immediately shepherds and shepherdesses molded of white sugar appeared from a different part of the wood. They brought out a gold reclining chair with a white stained cushion and invited Marie to sit down. As soon as Marie was comfortable, the shepherds and shepherdesses performed a ballet for her and then disappeared back into the forest. "I apologize for the poor quality of the dance, my dear Mrs. Stolbum," said the Nutcracker. "Our wind-up ballerina troupe can only do the same steps over and over again. Let's go on a little farther." "But I thought it was lovely," said Marie. Really, she stood up and followed the Nutcracker along a rippling brook. The scent of and stronger and sweet here. This is orange broth, said Nutcracker. Its scent is sweet, but the waters of River Lemonade are far more beautiful. Both streams run into the almond milk sea. Come, I'll show you. As they crested the next hill, Marie heard the sound of rushing water, and looking down, she saw the large rolling swells of the river Lemonade. A cool freshness blew across her cheeks, gladdening her heart. Nearby was a slow, narrower stream, where the children sat on the banks, scooping up the little round fishes that swam in its waters. As Marie approached, she saw the fish were really hazelnuts, and that up ahead was a little village whose golden brown buildings were decorated with lemon peel and shelled almonds. This is Gingertown on the Honey River, said the Nutcracker. Oh, almonds. This is Gingertown on the Honey River, said the Nutcracker. The inhabitants are very good looking, but they suffered from such painful toothaches that they're usually quite cranky. Well, come back another time. A short distance away, Marie could see a cluster of houses that seemed to be made of multicolored sheets of glass. The Nutcracker led the way into the town, where a crowd of pleasant little people were busy unloading tiny packages of colored paper and tablets of chocolate from a long line of wagons. This is Bonbonville, the Nutcracker said. Supplies have just arrived from Paperland and the King of Chocolate. These poor citizens have been repeatedly threatened by the Fly Admiral's forces, so they're covering their homes with special issue sticky sheets from Paperland. But forgive me, Mrs. Stallbaum, I won't bore you any longer with the small towns and villages. It's high time you saw the capital, he proceeded quickly, and Marie followed, full of anticipation. A rosy mist began to cover the land around them, giving everything a soft splendor. Marie saw the mist of reflected in the stream that gurgled alongside them, flowing out toward the horizon where it widened in a lake with waves of red and silver. On these waters, white swans with colors of gold floated gracefully by singing to them, while fish which glittered like diamonds danced over the rosy waves. Oh my, said Marie. I know what this is. It's the lake Godpapa was going to make for me so that I could play with the swans. The Nutcracker smiled scornfully and laughed in a way that Marie had never seen before. I doubt, he said, my uncle could never make a lake like this. You could, Marie, if you wanted to, but let's not worry about that row. It's time to sail over Lake Rosa to the city, the capital of Toyland. The Nutcracker clapped his hands, and the waves of Lake Rosa grew higher. As Marie watched, a carriage made of precious stones approached, pulled by two dolphins with scales of gold. Then 12 beautiful Nubian boys with headdresses and jackets made of hummingbirds' feathers jumped ashore and led Marie and the Nutcracker into the shell-shaped carriage, which then moved through the water of its own accord in the wake of the dolphins. Water shot up into the air and came down in a sparkling rain that seemed to say in a chorus of tiny voices, who comes over the rosy sea. Fairy is she, fishes and swans, awake and sing, sparkle and ring. Here is the fairy we've longed to see, coming at last to us over the sea. Rosy waves dash bright dolphin speed, merrily, merrily on. But the 12 boys at the back of the car had their own song, and they shook the palm leaves they were holding and stamped their feet and sang, clip and clip, clap and clip, clap, up, down and up, down. These fellows are quite amusing, said the Nutcracker, but they'll probably set the whole lake in a uproar. And then where will we be? Indeed, they noticed a great confusion of strange voices floating in the water and in the air around them. Marie paid no attention to the feuding songs, but continued to gaze at the rosy waters, where she saw the beautiful face of a young girl smiling up at her from every wave. Look, Mr. Drosselmeyer, she said, pointing into the water. There's Princess Pirlipat smiling back at me. The Nutcracker sighed deeply and said, This is not Princess Pirlipat, dear Mrs. Stallman. It's you. That is your own lovely reflection. You see in the waves. Marie, who was terribly embarrassed, instantly shut her eyes and leaned back in her seat. But then the 12 little boys lifted her out of the water, carriage, and set her down on shore. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in a grove even more beautiful than Christmas wood. The fruits on the trees were extraordinary and wonderful, and enticing fragrance surrounded her. Ah, here we are in Sugar Plum Grove, and there's the capital. Dear reader, how can I begin to describe all the wonderful things Marie saw here, or give you any idea of the magnificence of the city that rose up before her on a flowery plain? The walls and towers shimmered with different colors, and the shapes of the buildings were like nothing Marie had ever seen. Instead of a roof, each house had its own crown, with towers that were extinguishedly carved with the most intricate designs. As they passed through the gateway, which was made of macaroons and candy fruits, silver soldiers presented arms in their honor, and a little man in a brocade coat threw his arms around the Nutcracker and said, Welcome, my prince, welcome to Candy Town. Marie wondered why the Nutcracker was called a prince by such a distinguished person. Then she heard a loud, joyous clamor from voices all around her, and such laughing and singing that she just had to ask young Drosselmeyer what it all meant. Oh, it's nothing, dear Mrs. Stallman. He said Candytown is a big city full of merrymaking. This sort of thing goes on every day. Let's continue on a little farther. They stopped by the marketplace where all the houses were round and made a delicately filigree sugarwork, with balconies on above the other running all the way up to the top. In the center of the market was a square with monumental cakes shaped like an obelisk. In the middle, surrounded by fountains which bubbled over with lemonade and other beverages along the market footpaths were seen streams of custard, which could be scooped up with a big spoon. But best of all were the delightful townspeople who shouted and laughed and sang, people who came from every nation and walks of life, ladies and gentlemen alike, Greeks, Armenians, Austrians, Chinese officers, flagermen, and shepherds, all beautifully dressed and having a wonderful time. The commotion peaked at one particular corner as the great mogul passed in a carriage carried by four men with 93 noblemen following in the attendance along with 700 servants. Unfortunately, 500 members of the fishermen's guild were having a festival on the opposite corner. So when the great mogul decided to direct his entourage across the street, and another procession for the glories of nature began marching toward the obelisk, hail the magnificent sun with a full Austria in tow. There were just too many people in one place. Consequently, there was pushing and shoving until cries of pain arose from the crowd, for one of the fishermen had accidentally knocked off a Brahmin's head, and the great mogul had nearly been run down by a pudding man. The throng grew wilder and wilder till the man in brocade climbed up atop the obelisk and shouted very loudly 3 times, "Pastry cook! Pastry cook! Pastry cook!" Immediately there was quiet. Everybody tried to straighten himself as best he could and disentangle the different parades. The Brahmin's head was stuck back on, and people went on celebrating as before. "Why did that man yell pastry cook, Mr. Drosselmeyer?" asked Marie. "Dearest, dearest Mrs. Stulbum," said the Nutcracker, "here pastry cook is what we call the power, the rules, the destiny of the happy people. The mere mention of the name stops everyone from dwelling on earthly matters, such as blows to the head and small injuries and so on, and causes them to consider the nature of man in the course of his ultimate destiny." They went on to a castle with 100 shining towers, and Marie couldn't help uttering a cry of admiration as it came into view. Bouquets of violets, Narcissus tulips, and carnation decorated the outside, their rich colors showing off the rose-tinted white walls splendidly. The center dome, as well as each one of the pointed towers, was sprinkled with thousands of sparkling gold and silver stars. And now announced the Nutcracker. Last but not least, we come to Marzipan Castle. Marie noticed that one of the castle's principal towers was missing a roof. Little men on a scaffold of cinnamon sticks were busy replacing it. "What happened up here?" she asked. The Nutcracker explained. "Not long ago," he said, "this castle was threatened with total destruction. Sweet Tooth, the giant, bit off the top of that tower and was about to start in on the great dome. The people of Candytown had to give him a whole quarter of the town, not to mention a large slice of sugar plum grove. To keep him from finishing it off, soft, beautiful music floated out of the castle, and 12 pages appeared with torches made of clove sticks, lighting up the outside. Each one had a lovely pearl for a head, a body made of emeralds and rubies, and feet of pure gold. After them, four ladies about the size of Marie's. Miss Clara approached. They were extinguishingly dressed that Marie felt they could be no less than royal princesses. They embraced the Nutcracker, tears of gladness in their eyes, and cried, "Oh, dearest prince, beloved Nutcracker!" The Nutcracker wiped away tears of his own, then took Marie by the hand and addressed his sisters from the heart. This is Miss Marie Stahlbaum, the daughter of a very distinguished doctor. She has saved my life. If she hadn't thrown her slipper at exactly the right moment, and if she hadn't found me a sword, I would be cold in my grave right now, bitten to death by the accursed Mouse King. I ask you, can Princess bitten to death by the accursed Mouse King? I ask you, can Princess Pearlpat, Princess Thought, though she is compared with Mrs. Stahlbaum in Beauty Goddess and true Richer, I is impatiently, no! The ladies cried, no! In unison and hugged Marie, sobbing and crying out. Thank you for saving our brother, good Mrs. Stahlbaum. They led Marie and the Nutcracker into the castle, to a hall where the walls were made of sparkling crystal. But what Marie liked best was the furniture, the prettiest little chairs, bureaus, and writing tables, all made of cedar or Brazil wood, and covered with golden flowers, were placed about the room most elegantly. The princesses made Marie and their brother sit down while they prepared a banquet to welcome them. They brought out cups and dishes and delicate Japanese porcelain and spoons, knives, forks, graters, and stew pots, all made of silver and gold. Taking fruits, nuts, and sweets that Marie had never seen before, they squeezed the fruit daintily by hand, grated the spices, and washed the almonds in a way that won Marie's admiration for their skill. She secretly wished that she could assist the princesses in their work, and so have helped with these pies herself. Just then, as if reading her mind, one of the Nutcracker sisters looked up and said, "Good friend Savior of our brother, would you mind pounding some of this sugar candy with us?" Marie joined them gladly and ground the candy into a sweet paste. The sounds of the work for the banquet blended into rhythmic song, and the Nutcracker added his voice to it by telling them in great detail about the awful battle he'd fought against the army of the Mouse King. He told of how his troops had let him down, how he had almost been bitten to death, and how Marie had sacrificed several of those dear to her to help him. Even though Marie was listening carefully, she found it harder and harder to hear the Nutcracker's voice, or the sound of her own grinding. They seemed to be getting farther and farther away from her. Then a silvery mist arose in the hall like clouds, and the princesses, the pages, the Nutcracker, and she herself were all floating. There was a buzzing and humming around her that gradually faded away, and she seemed to be ascending up, up, up on waves of silver, rising higher and higher. The end.